Hello, everyone, and welcome to Web3 Unpacked. I'm your host, Rich Pasqua, and I'm here with my co-host, Matt Sky. We're thrilled to have Jon Vlassopulos with us today, former vice president and global head of music of Roblox, and now the new CEO of Napster. Jonathan is ready to usher in a new era for Napster, utilizing the power of Web3. And we can't wait to dive in and learn more about your vision for the company. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Rich, and Matt. Nice to be here, and that was a great opening. You're hired on the comms side, happy to give maybe an overview of. I've been on the job for a month or so I'm happy to maybe start with kind of why Napster in terms of moving to the company, if that's a good place to start, or. You guys are the host.
We would love to hear why Napster, and you have an interesting background because you were at Napster. So maybe kind of tell us a little bit about that journey and how you ended up back again.
Yeah, so I think post Roblox, at Roblox we had a good run from private to public company, and looked after music in the metaverse and took that from kind of 0 to 2. So I think. Coming out of Roblox, I was generally looking to attempt to retire, and was sitting on some boards, but was still looking at, as the metaverse became, with the rebranding of Facebook to Meta, popular at the end of last year, and every company, public and private, wanted to have a metaverse plan that then rolled into a Web3 plan, as you guys are in the business of unpacking. I think there was a lot of blending between the two. I felt we'd made some progress in kind of music in the metaverse. And then I was just looking at public and private companies, usual suspects, and a lot of Web3 on the gaming side in terms of private companies. It felt like music was an underinvested in category. So Web3 gaming last year took about $4 billion. It's due to take about $10 billion in investment this year, where Web3 music was more in the kind of $200-300 million range last year, and probably will be less this year. So in looking at the different opportunities, it felt like music, although more complicated because it involves rights, maybe kept some investors away, where it was easier in gaming to drop 50 million into a company, and you, me, and Rich worked on this title back in the 90s. We're going to get the gang together, and but it's generally very cost intensive to build a game, 30-50 million, and then you have to wait hopefully for it to be a success. So music, more complicated, but the great thing about music is you have millions of mini brands that already exist, in some cases big brands with thousands of fans. So I think as I was looking at opportunities, music felt like an interesting space. I come from music, and then, Rich, to your point, I did have a history with Napster. So this T-shirt is 21 years old. It has been washed a number of times. And, so I worked when I was at Bertelsmann back in the day. We lent Napster, original Napster, the peer-to-peer network, 50 million to try and legitimize it, and offered $1 billion to the music industry to license the service. And we had a bunch of new companies and features that we were adding into the community of Napster to create what would be then Napster 2.0. That didn't get across the line. My boss was a German guy, which is a story for another time. But anyway, we nearly got there. So that always stayed with me. And one of my colleagues went off to a little company called Apple, and has been running Apple Music for a number of years. So it kind of opened up streaming as an opportunity. I then launched a music service at AT&T when I was there, the first mobile music one. So I think being back at Roblox, politely I was talking about the streaming services as being a little antisocial by design, et cetera. And what we were doing in the metaverse was inherently very community-driven and taking advantage of new technologies and really doubling down on that relationship between artist and fan. So I think coming out, seeing a company that in a downturn that we're in now, or a reset, where a lot of the big companies are challenged, and I think a lot of new companies are being born for a next 20-year cycle. Having a company that had a strong brand personally and in the market, we reached 80 million people back in the day. So all of us lot, kind of 30 to let's say 45 demo is still very strong. In the brand affinity, having global rights that we had as a service. So the big belief is that the success in Web3 will probably not be a net new company. Will be more of this hybrid, where fans will have things that they already know and like doing, like streaming, but not just new, streaming all the things that they are used to doing, or and then adding in new features. So it had that. We paid north of $1 billion to the music industry, and then having great new investors who have deep expertise in TradFi and Web3 felt like a winning combination to jump to. So for that sort of combination of reasons, I made the jump a month ago and just come back from a kind of 3-week tour in Singapore and doing some press out there, and then London, seeing the team, and now back in Nashville.
Fantastic. What's the global reception like? Just curious.
So there was a lot of, I don't know if this is a late night show with bleeps, but there were a lot of from New York to Singapore to London. There were like New York taxi drivers like shouting, "You book, yeah, man, like Napster," right? So there's a lot of, and then in the Telegram community, at the event, there was a Token 2049 in Singapore. So there were a bunch of people at the different events and parties and speaking on stage who wanted to grab a picture, and it's like, I remember the brand. And then, so I think there was a lot of affinity, because the irony with Napster as a brand, it was kind of a Web3 brand before Web3 was a glint in anyone's eyes. It was about, revolution. It was about decentralized. It was about technology, innovating different sectors. So yeah, I think the reception has been strong, and I think it needs, in the Web3 space, specifically in music, it needs an aggregating brand to bring together a lot of fantastic projects, I think, that have happened with maybe a 2 million bit of funding and a 5 million bit of funding. So I think coming together under a brand that the industry knows and trusts, and that, a set of consumers have an affinity to, I think is a great opportunity to step it from the investor era, where people have been experimenting more on a higher ARPU niche basis, so less people spending more, to more of this mass market consumer experience where you got hundreds of millions of people spending, smaller amounts, $2, $5, $10, as opposed to tens of thousands of dollars as we've been. So that was, the reception's been good so far.
Yeah, it is a bit nostalgic, especially for me. I mean, it was the first foray into file sharing in a sense, right? Or decentralized, file sharing. So there is a kind of a soft spot for Napster. I can speak for myself, but others, I'm sure, feel the same way, and so does Matt. So we love the reinvention of Atari and these epic brands that kind of filled our youth. It's interesting to see. One thing we're really interested in, Jonathan, is understanding, having led, Roblox for, their whole music end of things. What concepts will you borrow, maybe riff on, or build upon for Napster?
Yeah, so number one, I think, is the realization that there's been an artificial cap on what music fans, which are all of us presumably as well, are willing to spend related to the artists and bands that they love. So I think the $9.99, which ironically was invented, so Napster is on top of a service called Rhapsody, which some of us may remember was the first music service back in 2001.
I do, yeah.
So we as a company spearheaded the whole notion of a $9.99 service 20 years ago. I think the feeling is it's 20 years later, more should be done around that. So I think fans are willing to pay more than the artificial amount of a $9.99 or $12.99 or whatever the number is. And I think we found that at Roblox, where a lot of the new commercial revenue that we delivered to artists was not around their music. It was around kind of fandom related between them and their all their millions of fans. So it was around virtual merchandise. So Little Nas X, it was little virtual backpacks and kind of, self-expression items. The Raw Blood guys, the little boom, guitars and little amps that you could pull around. So and Zara Larsson. So a lot of it was self-expression, which weirdly goes back. I used to work at AT&T a number of years ago, and we generated, these ringtones and wallpapers, which everyone was like, how on earth did that happen? Why would people pay more for less? It was around this self-expression. And also, I think, weirdly similar to the blockchain now, it was a new payment opportunity where you could do microtransactions on mobile, whereas on the web it was more challenged. So I think there are weird similarities, and some everything old is new again. So that part of the playbook of focusing on the artist and fan, unlocking, exciting money can't buy experiences that can be done virtually that fans would never, maybe, like we did meet and greets with glass animals and a whole bunch of different artists where you could hang out in a virtual space with your favorite artist. And a lot of the fans would realize that eventually it's like, are you really glass animals? It's like, yeah, we're really glass animals. And then they like lose their minds and they'd be taking like virtual screenshot selfies and posting them to social media. So I think that the notion that as more of our lives are being lived virtually, especially for Gen Alpha, that these experiences, so my kids are 10 and 12, and I think, their first ever concert, as they tell everyone, was Lil Nas X, and that was a virtual concert. So for them, there's no real difference between a virtual event and a physical event. So the opportunity for artists to grow beyond the physical restrictions of having to do a physical tour, which was really how they would reach the super fans, and then have merch at these tours. But when you really think about it, it's a tiny slice of people in the world and potential fans. So 40 million fans, attending the Lil Nas X event, maybe on a good year, if he's doing really well, he'll reach hundreds of thousands of paying, tour ticketed fans. So it's just a great way for artists to express themselves, reach more of a fan base. Again, lower ticket price items, but generating new revenue around fandom. So that playbook, Rich, we definitely feel we can continue. And I think with the gaming platforms, music will always be a kind of a sideshow or a second stage experience, quite rightly, because the main experience is around, gaming and fostering that as a community. So it feels having a platform where we're not doing audiobooks. I think some of the more, public music companies are having to go into higher margin products and SKUs like audiobooks and podcasts, because they have shareholders to account to. We're in that sort of sweet spot, Goldilocks, where we're not too big, not too small. So we want to be all about fans, all about artists and creators, and be a partner to them to allow them to connect with fans in new and meaningful ways, work out who their super fans are, and then kind of monetize together to make that whole experience more fun and engaging than it has been, and more social than it's been so far.
I mean, I have 14-year-old twins, so they've experienced the virtual concerts in the past, and it's actually mind-blowing to see how engaged they are. And then after the fact, they want to kind of join the communities and start to have dialogue around their artists. So it's really about building. Yes, the performance is one thing, but the community building is huge. And Matt and I we talk to so many different people, the heads of protocols and blockchains and whatnot, applications and businesses. And, we often go down the road, as many people do, into the discussion of the metaverse. And two names that come up are Napster and Roblox. And you've been there, you've done it. It was the foundational, the foundation of Web3 or decentralized web. It's really fascinating to see it all come back and really bubble up and really have a bright shining light on it. It's really nice.
Yeah, and I think again with nomenclature. So, I feel with Web3 and metaverse. So if you squint at Roblox and the ecosystem that we had there, we had Robux. And just because Robux weren't necessarily decentralized on a chain, they were effectively, I think, a good microcosm of how the mass market will evolve, because we had millions of builders. I think a lot of the time now with the different chains, we're still in the era of thousands of developers. Mm-hmm. So we had millions of developers as teams getting paid in Robux, which was our effectively virtual currency. Users were buying in with fiat, and as you know, with your twins, everyone wants a Robux for Christmas, for birthday, gift card.
Every holiday.
Right, so that they were thinking, consumers, in this case, the younger generation, were thinking in a virtual currency as a prime way of transacting in an ecosystem, which was gaming, where they spent time. And then all those microtransactions that were being purchased around self-expression because they were spending time there, were in Robux, and people would receive Robux as payment. And a lot of the community, the sort of, it's all disclosed, but a lot of people never cashed out their Robux. So it was sort of a liquid ecosystem where if I was going to hire Matt and Rich, you were going to hire me, we would transact in Robux. So I think there's an opportunity to kind of look around the corner. A lot of the stuff that was done in the quote unquote metaverse, I think once Meta rebranded, there was a little bit more of a blurring of Web3 and metaverse, and does a real metaverse need to be decentralized? I don't think so. Right. So, so I think if we switch out, the whole thing I've been banging is that the more a company uses buzzwords, the less of a business they have. So I think the less we can talk about, all protocols and chains and NFTs and this and that and the other, and we're talking more about fans and membership and passion and all these type of collectibles. Things are a little bit more human. And I did a panel in Singapore with a guy from Socios, which I thought was really interesting, what they're doing in sports. And we spent half the panel just, again, talking about fandom and membership and what you got, for joining the club. And so I think more we can humanize it and get away from the jargon. I think that's how we move from this investor era to more of a mass market era, where people in the back, in the back end, there are technology happening, or there's things happening on the chain. But for the consumer experience, it shouldn't be too different, which is why the Napster approach, I think, is interesting. So maybe if you're listening to an artist on Napster in a year from now, you could be listening to one track that's being paid traditionally on a label deal, but you could be listening to another track by the same artist that happens to be off label, that's directly on chain and paid differently. But as a fan, it shouldn't really matter. You could be listening to a collectible or an NFT, which is really, again, kind of almost, it's what we started with downloads, 20 plus years ago. It's like a unique, and then downloads went into streaming. So you could be listening to the version of the only 10,000 released tracks, but you're listening to the same way you're listening to the stream. But anyway, so I think all of it for the consumer should just be, I'm really interested in my favorite band, Sandnight Dynamite, maybe at the moment, and anything I can get around that band, I'm consuming in one format that's nice and easy, and I can take it with me wherever I go, and I don't have to think about where is that little NFT sitting, right? But it's more in the cloud, and I can just access it in the same way I've been doing up to now. So.
Well, Rich, that's something we talk about a lot, is the technology kind of disappearing into the background, and that's really what we need to start moving into Web3. And I guess, Jon, this is something I'm really curious about with Napster. In a sense, you were at the forefront, and we've talked about this, at the forefront of P2P and a lot of what we're seeing in terms of blockchain. At Roblox, you've had a lot of proof of concept in terms of currency and in terms of what we talk when we say cryptocurrency. But when you take Napster 3 and you look at the general streaming space right now, what's the compelling reason for someone to switch to Napster? What's the reason for them to say, okay, I'm going to move into this new way of consuming music?
So I think the good thing with the music industry, which I love, I started in the 90s as a DJ, and then for labels. So I'm a diehard music fan. But I think the good thing right now in terms of the business of music is there are a lot of very baseline things that could be done better. So some of it, again, is if you think about going to a live show, those are the super fans. And, I went to see The Script when I was in Singapore, good Irish band. Everyone's paying $150, $200 a ticket. 7,000 screaming fans singing every word of every song, and they leave with nothing, right? So that we feel is a big opportunity to have redeeming, collectibles and nostalgia things that you were there, unlocking things at the venue to maybe get you backstage. So there's a bunch of things I think just in the streaming industry and the live industry that have been separate that could be brought together. I think if you really, again, ironically, no one particularly talked about Web 2 businesses before Web 3, right? But now we're talking about Web 3 in context to something that's different. So go Web 2, but really, a lot of the streaming services are kind of Web 1, right? Because Web 2 necessitates community. So I think there's some basic even Web 2 features of music services that you'll start to see in Napster in 2023, where it's more of a community like the original Napster, where you could chat and connect with people. It's so inherent to music being a way that we express ourselves, and especially in the teenage years, that's how we have our identity, how we find our tribes and friend groups, and that kind of continues as we grow up. So to not have that as a proxy for connecting with people and sharing, and I think is a miss. And then again, I think from an artist perspective, as other companies are kind of drifting into more of, we call like audio consumption services, not really music communities. We'll be doubling down on supporting the artist and the fan, and providing experiences and tools for the artists to connect with their fans, and then for the fans having the place where not only can I get all the things I'm used to getting, i.e. streaming whatever I want to stream, but I can also get all this cool stuff extra, which I can't get elsewhere. And you may see in the future even some virtual kind of little meta worlds from artists like springing up off the back of Napster. So we want it to be somewhat of a music rabbit hole where you get lost in the bands that you love from a listening perspective, from a consumption perspective, token gated like meet and greets, but maybe also can run around little virtual spaces of the artists that you love, wearing your collectibles maybe that you have purchased, and you're chatting to people. So it's, it becomes again much more of this community experience and not just a transactional consumption vehicle where I want to stream the Chili Peppers now and I can put in the search and play it. So those type of things, along with the brand, which we'll be dialing up again from a consumer's perspective, this is not your grandma's or your dad's music service or whatever. This is the place this is the revolution, and we're all about bands and music and fandom, and this is different. The Napster cat, you'll see more of coming back again, kind of building on that original kind of rebellious vibe that the brand had originally.
Awesome. And it really sounds like you guys get it. I mean, you've been there before, and to us, we speak a lot about, what are the next generation of immersive environments or experiences, and it's about the connective tissue, right? So I love the analogy you're using of artists spinning up their own worlds or planets, if you will, or venues maybe. And there's a connective tissue financially through merchandise, through the music, through the entertainment, and actual locations. And that's what we see as the kind of the future of more of these immersive worlds that are coming up. Now, an interesting thing that's been bubbling up in my mind is, Napster is now allowing artists to get closer and closer to the artists, the consumers closer to the artists. Do you see the listeners actually becoming investors in specific artists? So not just buying their merch or going to a show, but actually maybe funding someone from the early days of their career in a certain sense. And that could be donations or actually buying, digital tokens.
Yep. So I think the general trajectory is you start with the fan, which is kind of where we are now, not in the streaming service era, but let's say in the live sense. So you're in the audience looking at the band on stage. So that's the fan. The second evolution of that is to member, where maybe you're getting access backstage after the show, meet and greet. And I think the third level or the third evolution is co-creator, or it could be co-investor, right? Where you're actually offering your beats or your samples or your stems, and you're participating creatively with the artist. Or what you could offer could be an investment in the artist, which is your point of co-creator or co-investor. That I think is a really exciting part of all of this, where the democratization of other mediums you think of the TikToks now, which is having its moment, is really community created video, right? I can do something very cost effectively that's then appealing to other people. I can collaborate with other people, and that becomes appealing on a short form basis. So I think music is inherently audio visual as much as it's audio. And I think a lot of the time working with bands like 21 Pilots, you could see that the artist is thinking, when we did the experience and show for 21 Pilots, they were really came to us almost like with an HBO, show. It was like a Westworld, right? Because they have so much lore. If you're a fan of the band, with the bishops and everything that was going on and the outfits and all the symbolism. And so I think allowing, the fans to be a part of that journey and for artists to connect and create in a kind of 360 manner. You're not limited again to just the 3 or 4 minute song, You can collaborate. You could do the visuals with an artist, and then you could be part of that visual experience. You could be a world creator, right? So if you wanted to create the little meta space with the artist, almost like in the beginning of the web. So when I was at the label, some of the first people, when we were doing websites, which is maybe an early precursor of a virtual world, right? It was a new way for artists to express themselves. Were techies in the community who would come in and go, I'm a fan, I'll build it. And a lot of the early digital people at labels were people who came in through fan clubs or artist communities, similar to Discord communities now, or Telegram communities, who were passionate about it and just started building out and became partners, if you like, with the artist and the management, and maybe went on to work at labels. So I think a similar cycle will happen of that fan to member to co-creator or co-collaborator, if you like, or investor. And I think we're just at the ground floor of all of that. And I think if we get it right in music with sort of music artists, we see music artists is really multi-hyphenate, where they're not, again, just doing one thing. You look at Lil Nas X, he's, fashion icon and a model, and he could be a, performer and a singer and a TV producer, and like everyone is doing everything. So we think if we can get it right for quote unquote music artists, we think, we can broaden that as the brand to more creators, and help creators more broadly connect with their fans in meaningful ways, and for fans to have this community where they can connect with each other and again, be fans to members to co-creators and collaborators.
I love that, the whole story, Jonathan, and you're kind of flipping the whole record industry, recording industry on its head. Whereas, it's always been, I'd love to work with Nine Inch Nails or this band or that band, or even local bands. But it's always been this boxed world, right? Now you're opening it up, and you can have young kids going, well, I would love to be a DJ. How do you do that? Now they can kind of get involved, and actually it's the impetus for them to kind of start their own journey in music or visuals or whatnot. So I love that from the base level of just getting younger people into the whole artistic end of the world. And who knows, you're creating music videos, you're maybe creating a video or a game or just the lighting for a show or something else like that. So
and I think also, like on the payment options, so microtransactions in the modern world within gaming and social and are tricky. So I think the advantage, especially why Algorand is one of our investors, and I think they have very high transaction throughput and never go down and carbon negative, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to have the ability maybe to license your track that you've created with someone or on your own within a game or on social media, right now a lot of the business models are just do it for free because you're getting promotion and you'll make money elsewhere, because it's hard to capture that $1 or $2 from a microtransaction basis. I think the blockchain and the payment backend actually enables a whole new micro licensing opportunity for artists in a distributed manner, beyond what we have now. And that was another thing we were looking at in gaming, is how can you provide, if I wanted, if I'm a creator, generally I was creating a world or a game or an experience in Roblox. But if I wanted to be a contributor to just the music part or whatever, how could I get paid for that? So we were looking at ways you could buy tracks with Robux, but I think with if you can buy them with tokens, and then you can, people are transacting, and broadly like Robux was to the gaming community, this could be the Napster token is for the music community. That opens up a lot of things that have been restrictive, on the payment side, which again is another way for artists, which we won't want to do, to have a livable wage, and be able to earn an income without having to just depend on streaming or touring 365 days a year.
Yeah, and you're making the whole process transparent, but simple at the same time, so artists can be artists, and contributors can be contributors. One of the things we talk about a lot is we, as the patrons of specific social networks, actually we are the batteries, we are the product. Now in this new world that we're seeing being developed, especially with the whole new Napster world, is, we're now contributors. We're now kind of partners in some sense. And the tokenization of the economics will just help things keep everything fluid. You don't have to be an accountant. You don't have to be a lawyer. You can just join right in and kind of get to work.
That's right. And I think on the curation as well. So, I had different startups prior to Roblox around interest graph and empowering us all to be creators and curators to help discovery. So I think what happened, unfortunately, with some of the streaming services, a lot of that curation got held at the corporate level. So curation for music being playlists. So I think historically, one of the great things, again, in the earlier years is if I'm a fan of Matt or I'm a fan of Rich and you're a DJ or my local record shop or whoever it is that I'm leaning towards for advice and guidance for whatever my art that I'm looking for is, in this case, music. I think that to rebuild and decentralize that curation within music is invaluable, where instead of having a few very powerful playlists, we can kind of reward the broader community to, if you have a great playlist and you want to invest in time doing that, maybe I could subscribe to your playlist and then you as an individual curator can have a little industry just being a curator and not even being an artist. So I think is great for music discovery. And around those curated playlists, you can have community. So think of something I've been knocking around for a while is think of a visual playlist as opposed to just an audio playlist. So imagine you're doing a reggae playlist, but you do it in a 3D space with the beach and, palm trees and your reggae. So I think the opportunity again to push creation out to the edges of the network as opposed to kind of holding it at the source is super interesting and just will be great for people connecting with other people that they might have, an overlap with taste-wise, kind of their taste mates, but then also rewarding that community for the great work they're doing. If they happen to have 100,000 people listening to their curated playlist, that could be a job, if you like. So it's creating new mini industries, even beyond artists, where I'm making beats, I'm curating a playlist, I'm like helping you distribute your music, I'm like a virtual promoter. All of these in theory could be rewarded and people could earn, depending on kind of the gig economy, a little bit here and a little bit here, which I think is great. So it's getting people invested in the community to again see music not as just a background experience, which I think for a lot of people it's become. It's like that for the kids, it's chilled cow, I'm listening on YouTube and it's just in the background, but being much more of a lean in participatory experience and a social experience, which as we know growing up, is what it should be. So
awesome. Jon, I guess what we'd love to know is, what do you think are going to be the primary channels where artists are profiting at this point? There are so many different ways with Web3 where artists can profit. What do you think are going to be the main ones?
So I think the obvious ones are collectibles. In some form or fashion. So that could be a access collectible where, I get something and I get to connect with the artist in an interesting way, sort of access tokens. Actual collectibles, which could be music or art related to the artist. So anything I think that gives me access maybe to a virtual event or concert. So kind of small ticket transactional items, which could be any of those, I think will be the main first area to open up. And if you look at the 15 billion or so that was spent last year in quote unquote NFTs, a tiny percentage of that supposedly has gone to the music industry or to artists. So we think that doesn't necessarily make sense. And if there was a place where it was easier for artists, they weren't scared by the word NFT, it wasn't complicated, but they could come together with existing fans and it would be more $1, $2, $5, as opposed to thinking that it's this, go get this for 10,000 and 20,000. It's like not for me. We think it's logical that some percentage, a percentage, 3%, 5% of that 15 billion, should go towards artists. So we think that's a natural first area to move to. And the logic being, if I put a gun to your head and said, name 10, new digital artists, you might die. But if I said name 10 music artists, I think everyone lives.
Yeah.
I would die. So it feels logical with millions of artists with thousands of fans that should be able to carry a collectible access, which is basically going back to the notion of fandom. So that feels like the obvious first place to start. access to kind of virtual fan clubs or virtual experiences or kind of collectible items that you would want to have. And again, not too dissimilar from the old days of a release vinyl or then it was a download, but just being able to play it again in an integrated manner where it's not kind of over here and you have to join something new, but it's within an experience that you're already used to getting everything you get in the current world.
It's funny you bring up collectibles. I'm thinking of my childhood and my concert going days. And, I made it a habit of collecting ticket stubs. I have most of them from when I was a kid. I'll have to do something cool with that. But yes, fantastic collectibles. Jonathan, thank you so much. We know you have to run. This has been a wonderful discussion. We hope to have you on again and continue the discussion and push further into new worlds. So it is a brave new world for Napster and for music fans. So thank you.
No, I appreciate having me. And I think we announced Napster Ventures. So we're also looking to invest in the space and potentially do some acquisitions. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time to bring the market a little bit more into the mainstream and catch up with gaming. So appreciate you guys doing all the unpacking.
Thank you.
And look forward to coming back again soon.
We'll keep unpacking.
Awesome.
Cheers,
Thank
guys.
you so much.